Welcome to the Plant Cunning Podcast,
where we explore a relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York.
We are your hosts, AC Stauble
and Isaac Hill. Hey, it's Isaac, and welcome to another episode of the Plant Cunning Podcast. In this episode, we have the amazing Charis Lindrooth, who runs BotanicWise. And she's a chiropractor, herbalist, and educator, and she's a fantastic, amazing woman. And we're going to talk all about brain health, cognitive health, dopamine, serotonin, cold plunges, and herbs for maintaining cognitive health. I learned a lot. I'm sure that you will learn a lot too, so I'm sure you're going to enjoy this episode. Before we get to it, I would like to mention that I am going to be putting up a professional website for my Vedic astrology soon. I've completed the second year of Freedom Cole's program and studying very deeply in this tradition. I'm also in a 5-year program with him, and I'm going to get to go to India this winter and study in the home of the tradition. But before I put up my professional website and all that stuff, I'm going to be continuing to offer donation-based readings for like the next month or two for November, December, and the beginning of January to raise some funds for my India trip. So if you would like to get a reading, you're welcome to email me at info@plantcunning.com. That's info@plantcunning.com. And we can set up a time to do a reading. And they're still based on donation. The average is about $75. But again, if you are low on funds, you can do it for a lot less. And if you've got more to share, then that works too. And so at the moment, I'm doing 60-minute readings, doing them over Zoom. I can analyze your birth chart, see it as a map of your karma, and offer some basic to intermediate remedies from this tradition. So if you're interested in that, email me at info@plantcunning.com. And here is Charis. Okay.
Boop, boop. Today on the Plant Cunning Podcast, I'm super excited to have Charis Lindrooth here on the show. Charis is a herbalist, chiropractor, educator, and the founder of BotanicWise, which is an amazing online and in-person herbal community and educational platform to connect plant people and for learning all about different herbalism. I mean, you've covered so many topics, but yeah. BotanicWise has been such an amazing resource for myself and for so many other people who are interested in herbalism. So I'm excited to chat with you today all about that and about some other things. So hi, Charis. How are you today?
Hey, nice to see you both.
Yeah, great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, it has.
Well, I've spent my life preparing for this moment.
Fantastic.
Us too.
Yeah. So we have a traditional first question.
Okay.
How did you come to the plant path?
That's actually something I've thought about a lot because, call it serendipity or the path of purpose. It is kind of interesting how I really stepped into the plant world. And it was literally a love of plants that was cultivated in my youth, particularly gardening with my father. But I was an elementary school teacher right out of I graduated from University of Pennsylvania, and it was kind of like, what do you want to do? My parents are like, get a job. And so I just jumped into teaching 4th grade. And I did that for 2 years. And in my beginning of my 3rd year, I was like, I'm really bored teaching the same thing to 4th graders year after year. I can't do this all my life. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? But the other thing that was happening at the hands of these 4th graders was that I was getting sick all the time.
Oh, yeah.
All the time. And, those little kids are like snot bags and mucus factory. And everybody tells you, like the seasoned teachers tell you, oh, the first year you'll get sick all the time. And then you'll build up your immunity and you won't. But I didn't build up my immunity, and I was sick every month with like horrible sore throats that went into bronchitis, antibiotics, and this cycle over and over every month. It was so rough. So I started seeing a chiropractor who was pretty eclectic, and he was doing acupuncture, and he introduced me. This was in the 80s, right when echinacea came on the scene, as like the new movie star, or I don't know. It was like, I think it was probably the first herb that hit the national scene.
Yeah.
So he introduced me to echinacea, and it was echinacea golden seal at that time that I took, and it changed my life.
Yeah.
I went from being sick all the time to never getting sick.
Hmm.
And I was so blown away. I was so scared to take it. It tasted so horrible. I complained, blah, blah, blah. And in the end, I just fell in love with this plant so deeply. And it was really because of echinacea that I quit teaching. I packed up my little Volkswagen Fox, drove to Dallas, Texas, and enrolled in chiropractic school.
Mm.
And not because I wanted to crack people's bones, which I have done plenty of since then, but I really wanted to educate myself in a way to bring natural medicine to the people that were seeking it. And, part of that too was that my very best friend had lupus, and I was we designated me as her health sponsor, like it's just sort of a joke, oh, I'll be your health sponsor, and try to find natural options for her, because the drug options were then and still are pretty limited, and also for her came with significant side effects. They just weren't an option for her. So I educated myself on her behalf. And then on the behalf of, hundreds and hundreds of people that I've treated in the last 30 years. It's been a while. So I guess that's the beginning of my plant path journey. From then, when I graduated and started my practice, moved back to Pennsylvania and started my practice, I really wanted to learn more about herbal medicine. And so then I took my studies a little more seriously, started going to conferences, and then I enrolled in David Winston's 2-year program. So that was a very solid foundation, to say the least. Yeah, it's very thorough.
Yeah, I've heard great things about David Winston's program.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
there's
he's
a lot of us who have studied with him.
yeah, it's amazing to hear that just like the one plant, echinacea, kind of was that like breakthrough to like bring you to
Yeah,
this path, and now you've like gone full throttle.
it's pretty cool how healing that plant has been for me, if you really think about how it guided me and pointed me in the right direction and took care of me at the very moment in what I needed. So it's so beautiful. And of course, I have it growing in my gardens all the time.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're like, I don't want to get sick anymore. So it's like, okay, I'll help you not get sick and also remove you from the situation where you're having to get sick all the time.
Yeah, let's get out of the toxic situation too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you mentioned how going to chiropractor school, you wanted to share natural medicine with the people, and you've definitely done that and continue to do that, not just with your practice, but with BotanicWise. So, can you tell us and our listeners a little bit about BotanicWise and what inspired that and what it is all
Yeah.
about?
Well, the first thing was I did love teaching. I just got bored teaching the same thing over and over in as a fourth grade teacher. And I was a good teacher. I have a skill set as a teacher. So when I graduated from chiropractic school, even when I was in chiropractic school, I was doing a lot of mentoring and tutoring to help people get through. So it just comes naturally to me. And I love teaching. And I began, sort of dabbling in the world of online teaching programs, courses, and things like that. But what really brought BotanicWise together was kind of the marriage of my in-person conferences, the BotanicWise, well, it was back then it was the Mid-Atlantic Women's Herbal Conference, and then Allies for Plants and People, which was another gathering I did in person. And the marriage of that with COVID, which just necessitated an online platform if I were going to continue to provide, this herbal education. And then COVID itself, so I started organizing things online, but COVID itself brought this big question to people, not just within the intimate herbal community, but anybody just looking for answers for how to prevent and treat COVID when there was no other options at the beginning. Remember that at the beginning? Yeah, there was nothing we could do, and it was scary. And people were getting sick and they were getting in the hospital and they were dying and they were having long-term COVID and all kinds of things. And was a great opportunity for the herbal community to step up and share their wisdom as best as they could, not promising anything, not really knowing whether it was going to work or not. But, it was Guido Masse that I asked to teach the first class. We just did a free, sort of COVID informational class. And that we broadcast that publicly on YouTube. And it was the most viewed video in my life. I mean, I don't even know how many views. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people attended live as well as watched it later. And what Guido did in that scenario was he just laid out, this is what this disease is, this is how it works. And this was new, none of us knew. And he really had his head in the game right from the start. So he was so generous in sharing that with us and then surmising what herbs might really work and what herbs might aggravate it, and how to address the ACE2 receptor aspect of it, which has the whole cardiovascular influence. And so, all of a sudden I had this online platform and it needed a name.
Yeah.
And so I came up with the name BotanicWise, which is just so near and dear to me. Like now it's kind of like having a kid and you can't remember your life before having that kid. I was reflecting like, well, it hasn't really been that long since BotanicWise was named. The platform's been going on for a while, but actually I don't even know what I called it before that. Like, I don't know what I was. I was just kind of like dabbling around teaching people online, but BotanicWise came together and then we hosted an online conference as well as continued this COVID informational panel, inviting other speakers like Christopher Hobbs and, so other people who were really what I call herbal geniuses, that really understand plants very, very well and were able to kind of extrapolate what we knew about COVID and put it together with plant options. So, the other part about BotanicWise that is I'm so passionate about, besides just developing community, which I think, finding each other, connecting with each other, feeling our tribe, feeling our kinship, I think that in itself is healing, even if you never take a plant. There's that. And that I've had so many people who meet me in person at a conference and they mentioned that I got them through COVID because we had that connection going. But the other thing that's really near and dear to me is that there are so many elder teachers, herbalists, who really don't have the tech savviness to teach online. So I love that I'm like archiving the beautiful teachings of, that you can't necessarily find in textbooks. You can't just Google WebMD or examine.com and find this kind of information. And so just having their heartfelt sharing. And now we have this beautiful library of the programs that they have been teaching in person that, Paul Bergner is one that comes to my mind. Paul Bergner's taught thousands and thousands of students. He's worked with thousands and thousands of patients for years and years and years. And he's never been able to reach as many people as he had through BotanicWise. And he literally, like, we've never met in person, but he literally like cried and gave me a virtual hug, afterwards, because it just meant so much to him to be able to share his expansive knowledge in this way. So I love that about the herbal tradition, that we honor our elders. And so that's a big part of my, I love young and upcoming herbalists too, but I have a special place for the elders.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep, they're still there and they still are so passionate about it. Christopher Hobbs, like he is a nut for plants and mushrooms.
And mushrooms, yeah.
Yeah, and that's all he talks about. Like you can't talk to him about anything else. Well, except maybe meditation and and love. He likes to talk about love. Friendship and love.
Yeah, his deep dive class that you hosted was, I think, like an 8-week program with all about mushrooms. I learned so much from that program, and
We're hoping to have him come back. I mean, he will be coming back to teach a class in our upcoming program as a guest teacher. Yeah, on some of the like brain changing impacts of medicinal mushrooms.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the talk about the herbal elders reminds me of BotanicWise. The women's herbal conference that you hosted this year was the theme was herbal elders. So
Yeah.
that was just such a fantastic event. I think it was probably my favorite herb conference I've ever been to. That
Mine
I know.
too. I don't think I can outdo that one.
It was a landmark year for sure.
It was, and we archived as much as we could with
Mm,
video and recording. And
so
I
good.
just thinking, Rosemary Gladstar opened that gathering with a keynote speech where she was honoring her herbal elders.
Yeah.
Really, like I'm goosebumpy. I was just like ahad. I mean, it's so obvious, but I was just ahad at that moment. Like, oh my gosh, we're doing what she's doing. She has all these photographs from all her conferences, and these elders who have passed are coming to life for all these young people who've never even heard of them, and they're coming to life, and she's honoring them with her memories of them. And now we're going to be able to do that, or my daughter will be able to do that. I don't know if I'll be around by the time that we're honoring the herbal elders that were there that have passed. So yeah, pretty beautiful.
Yeah, and just the various talks and content, like you had, so many different class subjects that were just so interesting. Got to do some pine basket weaving with Kate Gilday. There was song and dancing, and
Yeah, honestly, the month before that gathering, I was thinking, well, maybe, next year we'll have like a gender inclusive gathering and not keep it just to women. And, I ran a survey about it after the gathering, and my daughter really pushed back. She did not like to hear that. She wanted it to be women only. And I thought, well, we'll just see. We'll see. We'll see. I'll think about it. I'll think about it during the gathering. And, you know, I don't know if I can explain why it is so needed to have a women's only gathering. It's not like I don't like, I actually was inspired by the Plant Cunning conference to be gender inclusive because I felt very safe there with, all the people there. I didn't feel intimidated by the men or bullied by the men or like I've been to conferences like other ones that where the men are very patriarchal in a way, like very much in their heads in the science, and they can't help it, I guess, it's just like, I don't know. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I didn't feel that way at Plant Cunning. I just felt supported by all the beings that were there. And I was like, oh, this is like the way of the future. I loved that. And I would love to offer that to my community. But for now, I'm going to keep the women's. And
the surveys say mostly people wanted it to stick with the women. Yeah.
they did.
Mhm.
Yeah, 90%.
Yeah, I'm in that 90 percentile.
Yeah. And the question is, well, who's invited, and I don't answer that question. It's a women's gathering, and so if you feel like you belong there, you belong there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah. I think it is important to have the women's space, and it's hard to describe like the type of magic that happens, when you do have women get together like that.
Mhm.
And, we'll keep doing the gender inclusive gathering. So,
Yeah, there. So we can just come to yours.
yes, keep doing the women's one. Yeah.
Well, it's also like in a lot of traditional cultures, they do have separate gatherings and secret societies and so on for the different genders too. I think it's it's a good thing to do. It like a certain different kind of energy develops in that kind of a
Mhm.
space.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a different kind of energy develops like when it's co-ed or
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we did was right at, I don't know if you remember the AC, but right at the very end, we had a panel of all the speakers, and
Yeah.
they each had like 5 to 10 minutes to just share, something juicy. And boy, did some of those women get juicy.
Oh yeah.
And it came to my mind in that moment.
Oh
This
yeah.
would not have happened in the presence of, of male herbalists. It just
That's
wouldn't.
true. Yeah.
There's no way.
You're right.
So there was just this level of fun. And hey, like older women, they love to share about sex, and younger women want to hear about it. And
Yeah.
that conversation's not going to happen, without there being like a really safe space for it.
Yeah. And I also just love, I noticed so many mother-daughter duos at the
Mhm.
conference, and like what a special
Including my
time,
mom.
including
Yeah.
your mom and of course Mara, your daughter. But yeah, just like what a special time for like mom and daughter to just experience this type of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, so I'm really glad that you're going to continue to offer that space for folks. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you will end up outdoing even this last year's conference, or, maintaining the amazing community.
Something amazing will happen, that I'm sure of.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. So, do you want to get into talking a little bit about one of the areas of expertise that you've been studying in recent years, brain health and neuroplasticity now?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so what got you into studying brain health?
So neurology, when I was in chiropractic school, was the most dreaded class of the entire curriculum. And a lot of students, they had a reputation for failing a lot of students. So their graduation date would get set back. They would
Wow.
take it again and usually pass. But the teacher was a stickler. He was challenging. He was not the best teacher either. And so I don't know why I loved it. I just loved it, right? There's something about it that resonated with me. And I sat up front, I took copious notes. I had a talent for picking up on his hints for what was going to be on the test. And literally, he would walk out of the class, and I would come to the front of the class and reteach the class. Everybody would put dollars in a basket for me.
Really?
oh my gosh.
I would reteach the class, and everybody passed. Yeah.
Wow.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was proud of myself for that. I really should have charged way more money for it. I graduated with a lot of debt.
Yeah.
But that was kind of the beginning of it. So I had this like special interest in it, and I maintained that. I started to study. There's a chiropractor who is quite experienced in brain health. His name is Dadas Karadzian. So Dr. K, and I studied with him quite a bit, and then my grandmother got Alzheimer's.
Oh.
And I watched her decline with great sorrow, and she passed. And then my aunt was diagnosed with Alzheimer's very young, in her 60s. And same thing again. I just kind of watched helplessly.
Mm.
And then when my dad started to show signs of cognitive issues, then I was like, no, I'm not going to just stand by the road and watch this train go by. No way.
Mhm.
So I started working really deliberately to, marry my love of herbalism with my science knowledge about how the brain worked, and bring it together and develop a program that at least helped manage his symptoms. One of his primary symptoms was anxiety. And that, I think that a lot of elders, their anxiety is dismissed as a sign of dementia, right? Like we think of it as just simply forgetfulness. What did I eat? I don't know what I ate 5 minutes ago. But I think a much more intractable symptom and terrifying symptom is this anxiety. And it can lead to, delusional thoughts. And so we really got an incredible program in place to help him sleep properly, which is really important for brain health, and to manage his anxiety. And honestly, he died when he was 88, almost 89. And it was only, the last 2 weeks of his life where the house of cards really fell apart. So, who knows what difference I made? I'd like to think that I did make a difference in his life. And I like to think that I'm making a difference in other, my patient's life and other people that are learning from me. But, we don't really know, but I have a feeling.
Yeah.
I just feel so, drawn to this line of work. And then my story, that this story took a much more personal turn in the last 3 years. I mean, really the last 8 years, but 8 years ago, I started showing symptoms that I honestly thought I had a brain tumor. That's significant. My symptoms were nobody could, my neurologist could not figure out what was going on with me. It took quite some time. And 3 years ago, I finally had the diagnosis almost to the date today, Parkinson's disease. And my husband, when I handed him the diagnosis, in a bucket of tears, he's like, "You've been telling me for 2 years that you have Parkinson's." I'm like, "But I didn't mean it."
Yeah.
What the heck?
I didn't mean it.
I take that back.
Yeah.
So, now I have this intimate relationship with a disease I did not understand very well as a student or even as a practitioner. I really didn't think dopamine was that big a deal. I thought it was all with acetylcholine, which is our memory neurotransmitter, but acetylcholine is what's impacted with Alzheimer's. And dopamine, well, it's movement, big deal. But no, dopamine has, whoa, yeah. I'm going to be teaching a class on dopamine in December. And I looked at my material for it, and I literally could teach for 6 hours on the topic.
Yeah.
But I promised to make it only 90 minutes.
Okay.
What's 30 seconds of what is dopamine?
Okay. So dopamine regulates your movement. So that's why Parkinson's patients have tremors and awkward movement. So that's one. Put that aside. That's inconvenient when you're trying to open jars and when you're trying to walk and trying to balance and things like that. But dopamine also regulates your estrogen progesterone balance. So I had horrible menstrual periods my whole life. And I believe that that was because I already had a dysregulation of I'm sure of it, because it also regulates dopamine and prolactin work together. And prolactin is your hormone that helps you breastfeed. So if you have high prolactin, you're going to have low dopamine, or low dopamine, you're going to have higher prolactin. I had that before, as a single woman. So, I was like producing fluid from my breast. Gynecologist, I don't know why, but that would make sense. That all comes together now. The integrity of your joints and muscles. So one of the early symptoms are frozen shoulder or frozen hips, particularly if there's a tremor involved. So that's another thing. But, the kind of fun aspect of dopamine, because I say fun because you can really leverage this activity of dopamine, is your drive, your creativity, your will to live, your ability to overcome procrastination. All of these things are governed by dopamine. So, when I say your drive, like if you just suddenly get a hankering for a chocolate truffle, like a really good chocolate truffle, and you start thinking about that chocolate truffle and you want that chocolate truffle, you get a little spike of dopamine as you're happy thinking about it. But when the chocolate truffle isn't there, you get a drop of dopamine. And the primal reason for that is so that you will go seek and forage for this thing that you need. Yeah. Right? So you get the drop, and that instinct will make you go out and find your truffle. And then you get your truffle, and depending on how good that truffle actually is, like whether you just ate 5 truffles or not, it's relative to your status at that moment. So if that truffle's not very well made, or you already had 5 truffles, and so the sweet doesn't really, how that first cookie is so good and the 5th one is kind of sickening.
Yep.
Yeah. You can't just keep leveraging your dopamine all the time.
Right.
That makes sense.
So dopamine also has something to do with ADHD too, is that?
It does. Yeah, exactly. So your focus, your attention, your ability to take your view from big picture down into narrow focus on one thing, that's dopamine.
Mm.
So it's kind of interesting for me now that, everybody runs like a baseline dopamine. You have a baseline, and then you're going to get spikes up and spikes down. So it doesn't stay static all day long by any means, but you have this baseline reserve. And so your baseline, let's say your baseline is like at your waistline, if you're going to fill you up from your feet up
Okay.
with dopamine. And mine is, probably mid calf. I don't know.
Mhm.
Maybe sometimes my knee socks fall down a little lower to my ankles, but there are things that affect your baseline. And I think that's really like if you struggle with ADHD, you may have, your baseline might be, the top of your hips, right? Like ADHD is not going to be down like Parkinson's, like down at your ankles. It's going to be, hips, and you just like need to hike up those pants a little bit, and then you're good to go. You can get some focus. But looking at the things that impact that baseline is going to be more effective than trying to spike it by eating a chocolate truffle, for example.
Mm.
Because
Right.
when you spike it, you're going to get the drop, right? That's how cocaine works. That's
Yeah.
why people are so driven for more cocaine after they've had some cocaine.
So
Right.
they have it the first time and then they get this massive dopamine hit and
You
then
get a massive spike, right? You get a massive spike, and then you know how they say the steeper they rise, the harder they fall, or some saying like that, right? That is very true with dopamine. And then you don't just go back to your baseline. You go way below your baseline because you are biologically wired to seek your spike. So that drop makes you seek more cocaine at the cost of everything else in your life.
Mhm.
So addiction and gambling, those things can be dopamine deprived
Right.
states.
Right.
yeah. So how do you maintain, like, how do you raise your baseline?
Yeah, okay. So this is a whole big long subject,
Mhm.
but just to get you started,
Okay.
one of the things you might want to do is look at things that in general inhibit your baseline. And one of those is melatonin. So regular melatonin users may have lower baseline dopamine. So somebody with Parkinson's, for example, they often have trouble sleeping, but I would be concerned about them using melatonin to
Mhm.
improve their sleep. Like maybe that's their only option, and sleep is where you make dopamine while you sleep. So if you have a poor night's sleep, that also is going to lower your baseline the next day.
Right.
Mhm.
That's another thing. So that's kind of contradictory to the melatonin
Yeah.
situation. So it's kind of interesting. And then I mentioned the hormone prolactin. So, just knowing how your hormone levels are and addressing that can also help. But the one of the biggest, one of the coolest, excuse the pun, one of the coolest tools to raise your baseline. I know, Isaac, you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
Raise your baseline dopamine for the day.
Mhm.
All right. So if you want to raise it for a few minutes, eat a chocolate chip cookie.
Oh.
If you want to raise it for 5 hours and really get some good hard work done, really keep your focus, really bust your tendency for procrastination, then you want to do something that hurts. And
Okay.
I don't mean literally hurting yourself. I mean something like a cold plunge, right? You want to do something that creates a little friction
Mhm.
that you are resisting. You
Yeah.
don't want to do it, you overcome it, and your baseline dopamine goes up for literally for hours.
Oh,
And
wow.
I have lived this. Like I have lived this particularly through the art of cold plunge. And, we could talk a little bit about cold plunge if you want, but I just
Yeah.
want to say one thing about cold plunge. It is highly unnecessary to jump into a freezer of ice water with ice cubes all around you up to your neck. Like, I know that people do that, and they do that for their immune system. It does raise your adaptive immunity, your brown fat, which is particularly important for your immune response, your initial immune response to virus. But you could still get fantastic results at 55 degrees or even 60 degrees, just what cold water comes out of your tap and fills your tub.
Yeah.
And you don't have to put your whole body in, right? Like, I'll sit in my tub with the water just covering my waist.
Okay.
Sometimes even less. Like this morning I did it and it was 2 inches.
Mm-hmm.
Just what I could deal with today.
Right.
And I was a little short on time. So I did literally a 2-minute cold plunge.
Mm-hmm.
But I get relief right away. And the way I know I'm getting the relief is, within 5 or 10 minutes. Well, what did you get, Isaac, when we did the cold plunge at the Plant Cunning conference? Like, when you got out of that water, how did you feel?
Sure, yeah, like reinvigorated, I would say.
Yeah.
Is the best one word
Yeah,
description.
and reinvigorated, like physically, but mentally, right?
Yeah.
Like it just forces you to get out of your routine, your sort of rigid way of thinking. You're thinking you're hosting a conference, you're thinking about all the organizational aspects of it. You're sort of in a grind in a way when you're a host of a gathering, even though it's a lot of fun, but there's a lot of talking that you're doing, interacting with people. You shock yourself out of that. And then when you come out, with a greater sense of peace, a greater sense of perspective, and definitely mood enhancing.
Yeah.
And that's really, really important for people with low dopamine, right? Because we know dopamine has to do with your sense of well-being. Not serotonin does too, but dopamine is so key. And that was another aspect of dopamine that I didn't understand as a student, because I never really struggled with depression. I never felt despair. I always felt like I'm going to live till I'm 110. I just felt so invested in living. Like, I loved it. But when you have low dopamine, it weakens your will to live. And I can really geek out and tell you why that is, like the actual neuroscience behind that. I sensed it. I said, oh, before I was on any medication at all, including plant medicine for Parkinson's, I was like, I feel like a potted plant where the pot cracked a little bit and it's a little loose. I'm still in the plant, in the potter, and I'm in the pot, and I'm still growing, but there's a little looseness around my root system. And when I tend to my dopamine, that feeling goes away.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
So is it doing anything hard? So cold plunges have multiple benefits, but in order to increase dopamine is something like meditating first in the morning, which can be very like when I think of meditation, for me, meditation is not easy. It's not, it's something.
Yeah.
And then or like working out, or like
Yeah.
are those kind of things good to do early in the morning, right out of bed too?
Right. So actually doing, yoga nidra or some form of meditation has also been shown to raise baseline dopamine. And I actually choose to do it in the afternoon, like after lunch, when it was a good time, Ayurvedically, it's a good time to kind of rest, and really focusing on breathing and knowing that this is going to raise my dopamine pretty impactfully. And then using, the more physical aspect of raising dopamine. So exercise for earlier in the day. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, but that for me, that's worked pretty well. But, if it works best for you to meditate first thing in the morning and you really dislike it, so, resisting it is a good sign that you're going to get the dopamine raising benefit. Okay.
Right, so if you don't want to do something, it's better.
Yeah. If you don't want to jump in a cold tub, I don't like cold. Well, you just said that a little bit before this conversation started, for real. Yeah. If you're gonna get more benefit than somebody who loves it.
Right.
Interesting.
Okay. So if you hate going to the gym and working out, and you make yourself work out, So do you want me to geek out a little bit with you?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know why this is so exciting to me, but they've identified the part of the brain that is at play here. And it's called the anterior mid-cingulate gyrus. All right, which you don't really need to know, but just call it AMC for short, because that'll be like the movie theater. I don't know, that's how you remember it. AMC.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have this part of your brain. Actually, there's two, it's on both sides of your brain because you have two halves of your brain. So you've got two of them, unless something's wrong with you. And this is a part of your brain that scientists have determined is extremely susceptible to plasticity. So it's very resilient. You know, when we say plasticity, we don't mean rigid, we mean actually flexibility. It grows. And not all parts of your brain grow, which is good. There's parts of your brain that are protected from neuroplasticity, like your breathing centers, for example. We don't want that to change dramatically, because then we'd have to think about what we were doing when we were breathing. I mean, other than meditation kind of breathing, but just your natural staying alive kind of breathing.
Right.
But this part of your brain is very responsive to the stimulus that makes it grow. And it seems to be that it's the seat of willpower. And willpower is governed also by dopamine. So your drive, your focus, your attention, think about willpower. The thing that makes it grow is doing things, particularly moving your body, doing things that you don't want to do. So, for example, athletes tend to have very large AMCs, like professional athletes who are really pushing themselves. People who are dieters tend to have a larger AMC. People who are obese and have trouble staying on a diet have a smaller one. They have a shrunken one. So you have to like tend to this, because if you don't, it shrinks. And if it shrinks, yes, you're going to lose some willpower, you know, ability to focus and concentrate or get your tasks accomplished. But they're pretty sure that this is also the seat of the will to live. Okay. And the neurons of the AMC respond to dopamine. So somebody who's a little low on their dopamine has to work much harder to tend to their willpower and their will to live. So what do? You move your body, because people who move their body have a larger AMC. So that's the first thing. But doing other things like meditation, I'm sure, do help. Anything that causes friction. Cold plunge is a fantastic way, because there's so much resistance to getting into a cold plunge.
Yeah.
There's so much resistance to it, even though you know how you're going to feel after you've experienced it. And then if you do your cold plunge all the time, you're like, this is going to be the best thing in the world. I'm going to do it all the time. And you adapt to it and it becomes easy for you. Once it becomes easy for you, it's not going to do that anymore to your AMC. I don't know what, you know, it may still benefit your adaptive immunity, but as far as the AMC goes, you have to do things. It's not really adding more work into your scenario. It's just cultivating work that you don't want to do. And for neuroplasticity, you know, it is all about friction, right? Like if you've had a stroke and your hand is compromised, watching other people's hands work isn't going to do anything for you. You have to move your hand. Everything in your brain and body is telling you you can't. You don't want to. Think about sit-ups, right? Like who likes doing sit-ups? Like, I don't know who likes doing them unless they're already ripped. But, you know, like they just feel awful.
Yeah.
Right? But the only way to get past that and strengthen it is to do them. And that's true. That's true for all these other things. So friction, you know, when you embrace friction, not only are you growing your AMC, you're raising your baseline dopamine, but you're in a brain training program. You're training your brain to face adverse situations when they come down the road, right? So, you know, if you got into a traumatic car accident, for example, your brain will better be able to cope with that stress because you've already been training it through the stress of getting into cold water.
Totally.
The last time I said that, I was teaching at an Herb Day festival, and I came home and I got in a severe head-on collision. Somebody
Oh no.
ran out in front of us, and yeah, and it was kind of eerie to have just said that. And then, but I noticed at the time I was in this vehicle, I was in the passenger side of the vehicle, and I just relaxed. It's like you're in slow motion. This car is spinning around, doing whatever it's doing. I don't know what's going to happen. My daughter's in the back seat.
Oh, no.
My friend is driving, and her daughter's in the back seat. What's going to happen? And I was just like, we'll see.
Uh-huh.
We'll see. And I was just so calm. And I think that's because of this training.
Wow.
It's a really interesting, like, there's this opposition, but yet they reinforce each other between like willpower and surrender, you know? It's like by training yourself to do things you don't want to do, you can relinquish your will in another way, you know, like accept.
That sounds pretty Buddhist, I think, like I think that would probably mesh pretty well with the Buddhist teaching, which is, you're teaching yourself the art of letting go of attachment, and you do that through focusing on your breath, which is boring.
Yeah. Very
Yeah.
boring.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, you know, coming from like a Vedic astrology perspective, oftentimes like people with like anxiety is signified by Rahu, the north node, with the moon, which is the mind, and that also makes it's harder to concentrate. It's harder to meditate because there's so many distracting thoughts.
Right. That's right. And that part of ADHD is just your filtering mechanism is not in place. Like, we have an amazing information filtering mechanism in our brain. And I think that's why a lot of ADHD people are like extremely intelligent, because they're taking in so much information and really utilizing a lot of it, but it's also overwhelming and extremely distracting from trying to accomplish the task at hand.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's the difference between dopamine and serotonin?
Hugely different. Serotonin has a long history of study for its role in depression. And some of that has been myth busted, that it is the whole thing about depression. Like, now we know that it's not all that has to do with depression. But serotonin, just think about it as, you're it's a calming neurotransmitter along with GABA. It's more calming, it's more settling, but it's also your glass is half full rather than half empty neurotransmitter. So, it has a huge role in your sense of calm and well-being. And I think your sense of self, sense of who you are, like people who have low serotonin kind of feel they miss themselves. Like when you begin to raise their serotonin levels, they're like, oh my gosh, I feel like myself again. But the serotonin doesn't have any influence on the motor, that smooth motor pathway, which is so important. And it's equally important because it is one of the few sort of calming neurotransmitters that we have, along with GABA. Both of them work together. And it's also very important in social situations. So our ability to have friends, neurotransmitter.
Yeah, interesting. So we've talked a little bit about some of these like lifestyle practices like the cold plunge and things like that. And I have to ask about plants. Are there certain plants, fungi that have, significant support that offer significant support to cognitive health?
Yeah. I mean, the current movie star really is lion's mane, right? Particularly for neuroplasticity. I mean, it's been touted as being able to grow new neurons in the brain. It's been shown that it can support neurogenesis, but I don't want people to really like you take it with thinking that that's going to change their brain health in a huge way, because that it's pretty rare that we grow new neurons in our brain, and it's a really tiny number that are created. So in a normal aging brain, you lose, as we grow older, we lose like 150,000 neurons a day in a normal aging brain. So,
Wow.
if we grow 100 back, it's not going to make a huge, I don't even know what that number would be, but I know it's really, really small. However, lion's mane does help guide the neurons that are it protects them, and also helps guide the new connections that can be made. That's neuroplasticity, right? Like developing these new connections that are made with the neurons that are still there and healthy. And by doing that, you can learn to do something entirely new, like play ping pong with your left hand. And besides, lion's mane is kind of like the movie star here, but reishi is another mushroom that is, I mean, for me, I actually notice more of a benefit from reishi mushroom than I do from lion's mane, but I do take both. I alternate, and I use a lot of medicinal mushrooms. And I think all types of medicinal mushrooms are, I mean, all mushrooms I think are medicinal that are edible.
Yeah.
Even button mushrooms, have some medicinal properties, but I try to consume a lot of mushrooms in my diet. And one of the ways I do that is I will puree them. Like I'll make a soup and I'll puree them. And that way I can get like 3 pounds in to a week, because they really cook down. And for me, eating is kind of a laborious process because of my distinct ability as somebody's messing around with Parkinson's. But plants, those are fungi. One of my favorite plants is a really simple one, and it is profoundly protective to the neurons. It really helps protect them against just the aging process in general. And it's mood enhancing and it's very calming. And that's the milky oat. And I, really suggest that it's so safe, and you can make a really, really strong infusion of it. Like we're not talking like a tablespoon or two per cup. I'm talking a big fistful and making a quart and really letting that sit and get dark, as dark as it can. And then I'll even reuse those dried oats a second time. And so, I try to drink a quart of that a day. And skullcap, American skullcap, Chinese skullcap, both of them are really, I mean, for Parkinson's, Chinese skullcap root is particularly beneficial. It's not tasty, so I don't use that as an infusion. But I do use American skullcap with my oats, and Tulsi is one of my favorites as well. And Tulsi, we talked about ADHD. Tulsi is one of the most effective plants for focus and attention. So whether it's like you're going on a long drive and you want to make sure you're able to focus, you can have Tulsi glycerate in the glove box and just take that throughout your trip, and it will help. Or Tulsi tea, just drink a big water bottle full of Tulsi tea instead of just water. Yeah, and Tulsi is amazing. And if you're dealing with ADHD on the regular, I would take that herb every day. I would. Because it's not going to like leverage your dopamine, right? Or even your acetylcholine for focus. It's just going to nourish and support. That's different. When you're leveraging, like caffeine leverages, right? It leverages your acetylcholine and your epinephrine, your adrenaline. And yeah, it works. I bet you've had some today.
Yeah.
Right? And everybody listening, raise your hand. Have you had some today? Yeah, we're used to leveraging these neurochemicals in our body. We do it all the time with caffeine, with other stimulants, with sugar. We do it all the time. But the thing to remember about it is you really want to work with that baseline. Right? So that's the focus of my work right now. Is like we're looking at the baseline rather than the huge boost. And then you save those boosts for when you're teaching a class or giving a presentation, or you are doing an interview and you really want to be clear-minded, right? Like you save it for then, and then you're going to get so much more bang for your bucks, and you're also not wearing your brain out, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, and with the reishi and lion's mane, I think it kind of can make a difference how you take the reishi versus like a capsule versus a double extract, or
Yeah.
versus eating it in decoction. So do you have any tips for folks on what's the most like bang for your buck when you're taking those medicinal
Yeah.
oils?
So, okay. Well, I think so. Chanchel Cabrera has a saying, and she works with patients with cancer. And she's like, big problems need big medicine.
Mm.
You can't just take a little bit and expect a change. You can't just take a dropper full or a few drops of reishi tincture and think you're going to make a huge change. I mean, something is better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have something big going on, you need to take a good quantity of it. And that for me, I can't take that much alcohol.
Yeah.
It's not going to work for me because I probably need an ounce a day to really treat what's going on with me.
Mm.
So I use the extracted powders, and I use them only from companies that measure their beta glucan content and that I know are extremely low in starch.
Yeah.
Right? Because when you harvest mycelium, like mycelium is fine. It's a fine option for reishi or lion's mane, and they offer different qualities of medicine. So it's fun to kind of switch up whether you're taking fruiting body or mycelium.
Mm.
But when you are taking mycelium, you need to know that your producer isn't harvesting the grain that mycelium grows on. So if it tastes sweet, you can just taste it. You can do a starch test. Christopher Hobbs in his book talks about using iodine starch test, but I'm too lazy to do that. I just taste it.
Mm-hmm.
And reishi, good reishi, how does it taste?
Bitter. A little bitter.
Super bitter, right? Like, yeah, talk about friction. You get a little friction right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if it tastes good, it tastes sweet, it tastes, then you're paying a lot of money for oat or rice.
Yeah, that's an important point. Yeah, so any other lifestyle tips? Sorry. Do you have any other lifestyle tips? Lifestyle tips for cognitive health too. You mentioned the cold plunges, you mentioned ping pong.
Uh-huh.
What
Ping
else do
pong
you
is one of my favorites, yes. And I play ping pong now better with my non-dominant hand than I ever did with my dominant hand when I was healthier, younger and healthier. So, that's a great example of neuroplasticity. But the other thing we could just mention is sugar. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there's a condition called type 3 diabetes.
Mm.
Type 3 diabetes is when you become insulin resistant in your brain. So, type 2 diabetes, you're insulin resistant in your body. Type 3 diabetes, the neurons themselves, the sugar is there surrounding them, ready to give them the energy, but it won't listen to the insulin and get that sugar into the neuron where you need it for fuel for energy. And so the sugar surrounds the neurons where it has a very toxic effect. The insulin surrounds the neurons because it's trying to do its job, but nobody's listening to it. And that's also extremely toxic to the life of the neuron. And type 3 diabetes is actually now considered to be Alzheimer's.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty significant. So if somebody has dementia, anxiety, a tendency to dementia, a family history of dementia, or any neurological degenerative condition, it doesn't mean you never have sugar. I do. I just don't make it a regular thing.
Yeah.
Right. I try to save it for moments of celebration, moments, where I'm sharing it with a loved person, loved one. Yeah. And then there's so much goodness that's happening. And it tastes so much better. It's so
we're doing a no sugar November right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm proud of you.
Thank
we're
you.
still eating like 85%, like one little bit of 85% chocolate, or like
couple times a week or something.
it's not like full, and we're still eating fruits.
But no maple or honey.
No maple, no honey. Yeah, no, and no, pretty much no refined sugar.
Yeah.
But even just like a few weeks into it, I mean, and I've done this before too, but the fruits taste so much sweeter.
Yeah.
It's like the raspberries are like Starburst. They're like, you have like an apple, it's like so sweet you can barely eat it,
Yeah.
And that is actually coming back to dopamine. That what's going on for you there is dopamine. Because when you're leveraging that dopamine all the time, you become numb in a way to the sensation. In this case, the sensation of sweet. It becomes less sweet for you. So that first chocolate truffle is pure bliss.
Yeah.
The second, third, or fourth, each one, that peak of dopamine is lower and lower and lower. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, there's a reason why they say don't feed the animals at the zoo, right? Like, if you do feed them the junk that we're consuming as Americans,
food,
this food,
right?
The animal will lose its natural taste for the food that it should be eating, right? It won't want that anymore. Well, do you think that happens to us?
Right. Same goes for us.
It does. And if you really want to test it, right? Like doing what you're doing now, you do a 30-day, no refined sugar, like you set your parameters. And then eat something like a regular store-bought candy bar, like not an organic dark chocolate one. Like go eat a regular one, like like a Snickers bar. Yeah. And it will taste extraordinarily sweet and gross. You will have a repulsed reaction to it. But then if you let yourself have it the next day and the next day and the next, you'll start to crave it and want it.
So wild. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of people messing with our minds.
I know.
Make money. I mean, the food industry does. It just works. It works. There's science behind this.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when it seems it's like there's so many ways that things can go wrong, and you get easily trapped into cycles of like craving sugar. We're not getting too Buddhist here, but
I'm craving a chocolate truffle right now for some reason. I don't know.
I am too. I always am. That's my default mode.
It seems like a lot of the solutions are they reaffirm each other. They help each other. If you're building your willpower, building your discipline, you're not in one of those ways is to stop eating sugar or to do cold plunges or to do any of these things. You're able to, build that muscle, the AMC.
Yeah.
And then
I mean, I want to add another piece in here though, which is I've met a lot of, particularly some of my patients, but people who become so rigid and dogmatic about what they're eating and what they're doing. And so their willpower is almost too extreme. And I think that rigidity like prevents you from, well, first of all, it prevents you from getting a diverse experience with food. But there's no doubt that it shuts down some of the healing benefit that you're getting from the food that you eat. Like there's something about just forgiving yourself or letting yourself or experiencing food, I don't know, like you have to find that balance. Like you can't be too serious, right? We need joy and levity and love and laughter and silliness. And if we become too closed down, it drives a state of fear. And then we're running on chemicals in our brain that really perpetuate that stress response. So we think we're doing what's best for ourselves, but we're so fearful about what bad thing might happen to our bodies that we can't relax and open up to the healing process. I've been in that rigid state in the past. I have. So I know it well, and I just think just breathing into the challenges that we face as human beings, whether it's Parkinson's or dementia or aging or relationship troubles, whatever it is, just kind of breathing into that and remembering that this journey is part of the purpose of this journey is to struggle, and how we face that challenge. For me, the question I ask myself to keep myself on track is, how do I want to be remembered when I am gone? Do I want to be remembered for never eating anything off the beaten path, right? For never eating sugar and, like, wow, she was so stoic, right? Or do I want to be remembered for being inspirational, for being kind, for being generous, for sharing myself, even in the midst of a bad day, and I have plenty of them. Just being there for my family, for the stranger that I meet in the drugstore, right? How do you want to be remembered? And if you're walking your life with that in mind, you're going to eat the right things. You're going to take care of yourself, and you're going to take care of your community.
It's a different kind of seriousness.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot more fun.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So as far as time goes, Cars, do you have a few more minutes, or do you have to run?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, I just wanted to ask you, for folks that are aging themselves or taking care of their aging parents, aunts, uncles, community, like any tips for supporting them in their cognitive and emotional health?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends where where you are on that spectrum of aging. If somebody is struggling with dementia, you need to first look at them and see what is going to be doable for them. So it might be something really simple, like maybe they can't swallow capsules. So you make them a tea, and they love a tea, but they love, chai tea, that's their thing. But you really want them to take Tulsi tea or milky oat tea. Like those are such easy thing to give to elders, even if they're on medication, no problem. So you can make a nice infusion of the tea that you want to brew for them, like let's just say milky oats, and then you can put their chai tea bag into it, right? Don't be afraid to give your if you're anybody's struggling with dementia, a little bit of caffeine, because it can really help them as long as it doesn't give them anxiety. So you just want to watch. But a little bit of a caffeine support can help them with their motor function. It can help them with their balance, and it can help them with their memory. Okay. You can have a much better day. So we often think no coffee, no, chocolate is another thing. Chocolate is an adenosine inhibitor, and for people who can't tolerate caffeine, it can be really, really helpful, for memory, right? So it's such an easy medicine, nourishing. And then if you watch any like show about a zoo, they talk about enrichment for the animals that are in the zoo. And I think, if our loved one is in a care facility, particularly, or really housebound, they are like in a cage. And just think about, like, I have a friend who is 92, and he doesn't have dementia, but he is very confined he can't walk very well at all. So he's in a room watching TV, and the other day he just said, "You can't imagine how bored I get." And so, one of the things my husband does is he takes him out for coffee every Saturday, and it's their thing to do. And yes, it's an effort for my husband to get him out and get him into the car, but they go for this drive and this chat, and it's not that long. It doesn't take that long. And it's enriching his life. So making that effort to enrich their life, to visit them, to be with them, to talk to them, to not correct them when they're saying silly things. Yeah. and then feeding them.
Yeah.
For me, food preparation is really challenging. And then eating it afterwards is also very challenging because I have, motor dysfunction in my hand. So one of the ways, I feel most loved is for somebody to make me a nourishing meal.
Yeah.
And I feel so much healthier when I eat right, when I eat fiber, when I eat greens, when I eat high quality protein, when I'm not eating a lot of carbs. And that's the other thing is just, you don't want to deprive an elder who really wants her sweet at the end of the day, but just keep it simple or keep it small or keep it as healthy as you can.
Yeah. Mhm. That's all great advice.
Yeah.
Thank you. And last question I have for you was just in all of your deep dive and study into brain health and cognitive function and all the things, was there anything that really stood out that surprised you that you want to share with listeners?
I mean, I think the most surprising thing is exactly that, the benefit of surprise,
Mm.
which is similar to the idea of friction,
Yeah.
but that moment of awe. So it can be surprise in not necessarily a friction sort of way, like jumping into the cold plunge, but it can be a moment of awe. You watch so I love to track the moon, and it always gives me a sense of awe. And in that moment of awe, you're affecting your brain chemistry in a really positive way, particularly in your sense of place in the world. It's just interesting how a connection with something so gigantic as the starry sky, right? Something so that makes me feel so small and insignificant actually brings me a sense of peace because it gets me out of my isolation, right? My feeling like my problems, I'm the only one with these problems. You suddenly feel connected to the oneness of the universe. You feel part of that ocean. I'm a wave traveling across the ocean, but I'm part of the ocean. You can't take me off of it. And I'm going to change and I'm going to come to shore and then I'm going to be the next wave. That's just
Love it. Yeah.
not very scientific, but
No,
but
it's so true. Like, yeah, being in those moments of awe, like seeing the moon, seeing a beautiful mountain range, really vibing with that Tulsi plant in your garden, like brings you to the heart space. And yeah, it just helps with so many areas, the
it
emotional.
requires slowing down, right?
Sure.
Which I'm forced into. That is part of Parkinson's is you move more slowly and everything takes longer to do.
Mhm.
So, I have a slower life than I used to, but I see more. I take
Mhm.
time to see more. But it is, the first thing I'll turn to if I'm sad, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
Getting outside and connecting with something that brings awe and sharing that with somebody is even better.
Mhm.
So I have a girlfriend that, we don't text each other much, except we text each other pictures of the moon like every day.
Nice.
It's just a way of saying, I see the moon, you see the moon, so we are connected because our visual is
Mhm.
connected via this moon, right?
Mhm.
It's got to be some power in that.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Well, Karis, thank you so much for sharing all of your infinite wisdom and stories. And this has been such an amazing chat. I really love talking to you. So thank you for
Aw,
being here.
thanks for having me. It's been so much fun. I love you.
Yeah,
I love the
I
work
love
that
you.
you're doing and bringing to your community. So thank you for that too.
Yeah, thank you, Karis. And what's next for you in BotanicWise? I know you have a class, free workshop coming up November 19th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on cognitive function.
Yeah, that one's on neuroplasticity, and I'm going to share, my personal protocol for neuroplasticity and some of the science behind it, inspire people that they can teach their old dog new tricks.
Nice.
Um, And then on the following Saturday, on November 23rd, I'll be hosting Seven Song for a really beautiful class on anxiety, which actually I heard him speak on this topic at Plant Cunning Conference. And I was like, oh, I need to share this with more people. So he's doing an expanded version of that class. It's a really unique perspective. And it just feels like this time of year is really challenging. I mean, it is really challenging because of the short daylight,
Yeah.
affecting serotonin particularly leads to more anxiety. And then shortly after that, I'll be teaching a pretty in-depth class about finding that baseline balance for 4 key neurochemicals. There's a lot of neurotransmitters, neuromodulators that affect our brain function. And some of them we don't want to mess with, but these are 4 that we can really tend to and nurture and try to support to just bring about a sense of peace, a sense of creativity and drive, um, that stronger memory. Just like in general, what can we do to bring a balance to our brain health so that we can be more productive and happy?
So
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you for offering all of these amazing classes and hosting these herbal elders and teachers. Your work is just so inspiring. So everyone, please go look up Charis's work and please look up BotanicWise at botanicwise.com.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks again, Charis. And
I hope
enjoy
to
the
see
rest
you.
of your day.
Yeah. Happy winter.
Thank you. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thank you.